Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.
High above Ashran, the paired suns raged without mercy, their united fire roasting the vast, wish-covered desert that rolled out toward the distant edge. Darren Kell, his weather-beaten face partially hidden beneath a tattered hood, squinted against the glare as he trudged forward, each step sinking into the soft sand. Sweat trickled down his neck, its saltiness a bitter reminder of his dwindling reserves. Blasted heat, he muttered, reaching for the flask at his hip. The lukewarm water barely wet his parched throat. 3 days since the ambush, 3 days of walking with only the stars and suns for company. The betrayal still burned hotter than the desert around him. He'd been a fool to trust the Varden merchants. 10 years as a mercenary should have taught him better. The memory flashed before him again. The northern oasis, a promised payment for escort services, then the glint of knives in the shadows. His squad hadn't stood a chance. Lyra, Jenks, Talon, all dead, their bodies left to the desert scavengers. Darren adjusted the torn leather jacket that hung loosely around his frame. Once deep brown and supple, it was now bleached by sun and caked with sand. Like him, it had seen better days. His fingers brushed against the empty holster where his blaster should have been. The merchants had taken that too, along with his credits and supplies. One step, then another, he reminded himself, a mantra from his first commander. Death comes to the man who stops moving. The wind picked up, lashing his face with stinging particles. Darren pulled his scarf tighter and leaned into the gale. The horizon wavered in the heat, a mirage of salvation that retreated with each step. Perhaps this was his end, not in glorious battle as he'd once imagined, but as another nameless corpse in the unforgiving wasteland of Ashran. His boot caught on something beneath the sand, and he stumbled, cursing as he sprawled forward. Pain shot through his palms as they struck the hot surface. For a moment, he lay there, feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing him down. "Get up," he growled to himself. "Get up or die here." As he pushed himself to his knees, his fingers brushed against something hard beneath the sand. Not stone, but metal. Curiosity, that dangerous instinct that had both saved and damned him countless times, made him dig through the ash-like sand. The object emerged gradually, first a hilt, darkened with age, then a blade, notched and rusted, yet oddly intact despite what must have been years of burial. It was a sword, ancient in design with strange symbols etched along its length that seemed to shimmer when caught in the sunlight. "Well," Darren muttered, hefting the weapon. Despite its appearance, it was perfectly balanced, solid and cold in his grip. "You're not much to look at, but I guess beggars can't be choosers." He tucked the sword into his belt, appreciating its weight. At least now he wasn't completely defenseless. Little did he know that this simple act of salvage would alter the course of his life and the fate of Ashran itself. The sound came without warning, a soft shifting of sand that made Darren's battle-trained senses prickle. He spun around, hand automatically drawing the rusted sword. From behind the nearest dunes emerged figures, their silhouettes wavering in the heat. As they approached, Darren counted a dozen warriors. Their skin was a striking malachite green, covered partially by faded fabrics and leather armor, etched with symbols similar to those on the sword. They carried spears tipped with what looked like polished bone, and moved with the practiced precision of hunters. Darren widened his stance, muscles tensed for combat. His odds weren't good, 12 against 1, and him exhausted and dehydrated, but he'd faced worse, or so he told himself. "Stay back," he warned, his voice raspy from thirst. "I've got nothing worth taking." To his astonishment, the warriors didn't attack. Instead, they stopped several paces away, and as one dropped to their knees. Their leader, a tall, broad-shouldered man with deep lines etched into his green face by sun and age, looked up at Darren with eyes that shimmered like liquid amber. "Veshatir Naruk, Selatir and Kresh," the man said, his voice deep and reverent. "The long-lost lord has returned to us." Darren blinked, uncomprehending. Although he didn't understand their language, the gesture was unmistakable. These weren't bandits or scavengers. They were kneeling before him. "Look, there's been some mistake," he began, but was interrupted by a new sound, the pounding of many feet against sand, accompanied by the metallic clink of armor. From beyond the dunes burst another group, this one clad in black cloaks that billowed behind them like wings of ill omen. They wielded short, curved blades and compact crossbows that gleamed with malevolent purpose. Their faces were hidden behind metal masks shaped into perpetual snarls. "Saunders hounds," spat the green-skinned leader, rising to his feet with surprising agility for his age. "Slay them! Protect the Lord!" The air filled with the whistling of spears as the green warriors launched into attack. Crossbow bolts whizzed in return and the peaceful desert erupted into chaos. Darren dove behind a nearby rock, his mercenary instincts taking over. This wasn't his fight, and yet he found himself trapped in the middle of it. A bolt thudded into the sand inches from his face. Darren cursed and pressed himself flatter against the ground. He watched as one of the green warriors fell, a bolt protruding from his chest, his amber eyes wide with shock. "Move if you want to live." The voice, sharp and commanding, came from beside him. Darren turned to find a woman crouched there, her features striking rather than conventionally beautiful. High cheekbones, a straight nose, and dark eyes that burned with intensity. She wore a light sand-colored cloak, and a curved knife hung at her hip. "Who?" Darren began, but she cut him off. "No time. They'll kill you if they find you with that sword." She nodded toward the rusty blade still clutched in his hand. "Follow me. Now." Without waiting for his response, she darted away, keeping low and using the dunes for cover. After a moment's hesitation, Darren followed, ducking as another bolt sailed overhead. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued. Shouts, screams, the thud of bodies hitting sand. The woman led him through a narrow pass between towering rock formations, moving with the confidence of someone who knew the landscape intimately. Darren matched her pace, his breathing labored but steady. Years of combat had given him endurance, if nothing else. They emerged on the other side of the pass just as the suns began their descent toward the horizon. The woman finally slowed, glancing back to ensure they weren't followed. "I think we lost them," she said, her voice less commanding now, though no less intense. "For now." Darren leaned against a rock, catching his breath. "Mind telling me what the hell that was about?" She studied him for a long moment, her gaze lingering on the sword. "My name is Sarah, and you've just stumbled into a war that's been brewing for 20 years. "I'm not looking for a war," Darren replied bluntly. "I'm looking for water and a way off this rock." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "Yet war has found you, Darren Kell." His hand went instinctively to his blade. "How do you know my name?" "The same way I know that sword you're carrying." She pointed to the rusty blade. "That's the blade of ancestors, the symbol of Ashran's last true ruler, whose dynasty was wiped out by the tyrant Cassander 2 decades ago." Darren looked down at the weapon with new eyes. "This thing? It's just a rusty old sword I found buried in the sand." "That rusty old sword is why those warriors, the Sha'ir, were kneeling to you. They believe you're the heir to the throne, returned to reclaim Ashran as the prophecies foretold." Darren laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet desert. "That's nonsense. I'm a mercenary, not some long-lost prince. The Sha'ir have me confused with someone else." Syra's expression remained serious. "Do they? You found the sword where generations have searched for it. That's no accident." "It's a coincidence, nothing more." Darren wiped sweat from his brow. "Look, I appreciate the rescue, but I'm not interested in prophecies or thrones. I just want to survive." "Then we have the same immediate goal." Syra nodded toward the setting suns. "Night falls quickly here, and the desert predators hunt in darkness. We need shelter." She set off again, her stride purposeful. After a moment, Darren followed, the sword feeling unexpectedly heavy at his hip. The night brought a bone-deep cold that contrasted sharply with the day's heat. Syra led Darren to a small cave nestled in the rock formations, where they built a small fire from sparse desert brush. The flames cast dancing shadows on the cave walls, illuminating strange ancient carvings that Darren couldn't decipher. "Here," Syra said, passing him a water flask. "Drink sparingly. It's a long journey to the Sha'ir refuge." Darren took a careful sip, the cool liquid heavenly against his parched throat. "Why are you helping me?" Sarah poked at the fire, sending sparks upward. "I've fought against Sander's tyranny since I was old enough to hold a blade." The Sha'ir took me in when his men slaughtered my family. Her voice remained steady, but Darren caught the flicker of old pain in her eyes. If there's even a chance you're who they believe you are, a chance to end his reign, I'll take it. And if I'm not, she met his gaze directly, then you're still a skilled fighter who found the blade, and that makes you valuable to our cause. Darren leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion settling over him like a heavy cloak. Tell me about this sword. Why is it so important? The Blade of Ancestors was forged during Ashran's Golden Age, when the planet was green and prosperous, not the wasteland you see now. It's said to be bound to the bloodline of the true rulers. Syra's voice took on a rhythmic quality, as if reciting from memory. For generations, it passed from ruler to ruler until Sander's betrayal. Tehran, the last emperor, hid it before he was killed, hoping his heir would one day find it. And the Sha'ir think I'm this heir. Darren shook his head. I grew up in the outer colonies, not on Ashran. My parents were nobody special, just colonists trying to make a living. Were they? Syra's question hung in the air. Or is that what you were told? Darren had no answer. The fire crackled in the silence, sending shadows dancing across the cave walls. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the distant calls of desert predators. Get some rest, Sarah finally said. I'll take first watch. Tomorrow will be challenging. Sleep came surprisingly easily to Darren, his body surrendering to exhaustion. But his dreams were troubled, filled with unfamiliar faces, a palace of white stone, and the echoing sound of a child's cry. He awoke to Syra's hand on his shoulder, her expression tense. We need to move. Sander's scouts are combing the area. They slipped out of the cave as the first sun crested the horizon, casting long shadows across the dunes. Ahead lay a vast expanse of desert, shimmering in the growing heat. The Sha'ir refuge is 3 days' journey, Sarah explained as they walked. We'll need to cross the burning flats, then navigate the shattered canyons. Neither will be pleasant. Nothing on this planet seems pleasant, Darren muttered. Syra glanced at him. It wasn't always like this. Before Sander, Ashran was known as the jewel of the Outer Rim. Its cities were marvels of crystal and stone, its valleys lush with vegetation. What happened? Sander happened. He diverted the planet's resources to his war machines and mining operations, stripping the land bare. The climate shifted, and the deserts grew. Her voice hardened. The people suffered, but he didn't care, as long as his coffers filled and his power expanded. As they traversed the burning flats, the heat became almost unbearable. The ground beneath their feet was cracked and blistered, as if the planet itself was wounded. Despite the harsh conditions, Darren found himself oddly drawn to the landscape's stark beauty. The way the light played across the dunes, the distant shimmer of heat mirages, the occasional glimpse of hardy desert flora clinging tenaciously to life. By midday, they encountered the first test of their journey, a massive sandstorm that appeared on the horizon like a wall of fury. We can't outrun it, Sarah said, her eyes scanning the area. There, she pointed to a cluster of rocks. We can use them for shelter. They raced toward the rocks as the storm bore down on them, the wind already picking up, stinging their exposed skin with sand particles. They reached the formation just as the full force of the storm hit, pressing themselves into a narrow crevice between two boulders. The world outside became a howling chaos of sand and wind. Darren pulled his scarf over his face, but the fine particles seemed to find every opening, every seam in his clothing. Beside him, Syra was a steady presence, her body warm against his in the confined space. Does it always get this bad? He shouted over the wind. Only during high summer, she called back. We're lucky. This one's relatively mild. If this is mild, I'd hate to see severe, Darren muttered, though his words were lost in the storm's roar. For hours, they huddled together, waiting for nature's fury to abate. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find the landscape transformed, dunes shifted, landmarks altered, paths obscured. This complicates things, Sarah said, brushing sand from her clothing. We'll need to be careful. It's easy to get lost now. They continued their journey, the twin suns beating down on them relentlessly. Darren found himself increasingly aware of the sword at his hip, its weight a constant reminder of the strange twist his life had taken. Occasionally he caught Syra studying him when she thought he wasn't looking, her expression a mixture of hope and skepticism. As the suns began to set on their first full day of travel, they spotted movement in the distance, dark shapes moving swiftly across the sand. Sand hyenas, Sarah hissed, drawing her curved knife. They hunt in packs and can smell water from miles away. Darren drew the rusty sword, its blade catching the fading sunlight. How many? I count 6. Syra's eyes narrowed. Back to back. Don't let them surround us. The creatures approached rapidly, sleek, powerful bodies covered in mottled hide, with elongated snouts filled with razor-sharp teeth. They moved with an unsettling coordination, spreading out to encircle their prey. The first hyena lunged at Darren, its jaws snapping. Almost instinctively, he brought the sword around in a sweeping arc that caught the creature mid-leap, slicing deep into its flank. It fell with a shriek, writhing in the sand. Behind him, he heard Syra engage another, her knife flashing. 2 more circled warily, their yellow eyes calculating. Darren shifted his stance, the sword feeling oddly natural in his grip, as if his hand had been shaped to hold it. When the hyenas attacked again, they came from both sides. Darren spun, the blade moving with unexpected fluidity, catching one creature across the throat. He ducked as the second sailed over his head, then thrust upward, feeling the blade sink home. The remaining hyenas, sensing the change in odds, retreated, their snarls fading into the gathering darkness. Darren stood, breathing heavily, and looked at the sword in his hand. Despite the violence, the blade remained clean, the rust seemingly impervious to blood. You fight well, Sarah said, cleaning her knife on a cloth, like you were born to wield that blade. Darren sheathed the sword, uncomfortable with her implication. I've been fighting to survive most of my life. You get good at it, or you die. They made camp as night fell, building a small fire in the shelter of a dune. The desert cold settled around them, and the stars emerged, countless pinpricks of light in the vast blackness above. Tell me about Terran, Darren said suddenly, the emperor who hid the sword. Syra looked up from the fire, surprise flickering across her face. Why do you want to know? If I'm going to be mistaken for his heir, I should at least know something about him. She studied him for a moment, then nodded. Terran was a good ruler, just and compassionate. He inherited a planet already beginning to suffer from resource depletion and did what he could to reverse the damage. He established conservation zones, regulated mining operations, invested in sustainable technologies. Sounds like a rare breed of politician. A small smile touched Syra's lips. He was. That's why his betrayal was so shocking. Xander was his most trusted warlord, the commander of his forces. No one saw the coup coming until it was too late. What happened to Terran's family? Darren asked, though part of him already knew the answer. His wife was killed in the initial attack, but their infant son, Syra's eyes locked with his. Terran managed to hand the child to a trusted ally who fled off-world with the boy. Sanders' men searched for years, but never found him. The fire crackled between them, sending sparks spiraling upward toward the stars. Darren found himself running his thumb over the hilt of the sword, tracing the ancient symbols etched there. I'm not him, Syra, he said quietly. I can't be the person you're looking for. Yet you found the sword when no one else could, she replied. And have you noticed how the Sha'ir language sounds to you? Did it seem completely foreign? Darren hesitated. There had been something about the warrior's words, a distant familiarity, like an echo from a forgotten dream. But that could be explained away. In his years as a mercenary, he'd encountered dozens of languages, countless dialects. Coincidences happen, he said finally. Don't build your hopes on them. Syra didn't argue, but her expression remained unconvinced. Get some sleep. I'll wake you for your watch. The next 2 days brought new challenges. Treacherous terrain in the shattered canyons, where the ground split suddenly into deep crevasses, and another encounter with Sanders' scouts that forced them to hide for hours in the blistering heat. Throughout it all, Darren found himself increasingly drawn into Syra's cause despite his objections. The stories she told of Sanders' tyranny, public executions, labor camps, villages razed for the crime of harboring dissidents, awakened a deep anger within him. How has he remained in power so long? Darren asked, as they navigated a particularly narrow canyon passage. Fear mainly, Syra replied, her voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. And he's clever. He keeps the merchant clans and wealthy landowners happy with privileges and tax exemptions. They, in turn, help him control the common people. No resistance besides the Sha'ir? There have been attempts, all crushed brutally. She glanced back at him. The prophecy of the heir's return is what keeps hope alive. Without it, I'm not sure the resistance would still exist. Darren absorbed this in silence, feeling an uncomfortable weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Whether he believed he was this prophesied heir or not, others did, and they were risking their lives based on that belief. By the third day, the terrain began to change. The endless dunes gave way to rockier ground, and occasionally they passed stunted trees, signs that they were approaching a region with more water. We're close now, Sarah said, pointing to a distant line of cliffs that shimmered in the heat. The refuge is hidden within those formations. As they approached the cliffs, figures appeared, green-skinned warriors similar to those Darren had encountered when he found the sword. They regarded him with solemn reverence, touching their foreheads in a gesture of respect as he passed. A narrow, winding path led up into the cliffs, eventually opening into a hidden valley. Darren stopped in surprise. Within the rocky embrace of the surrounding mountains was an oasis. Trees with broad, flat leaves provided shade, while a small lake shimmered at the center. Stone dwellings were built into the cliff faces, connected by bridges and walkways of rope and wood. "Welcome to Sha'irka," Syra said, a note of pride in her voice. "The last free settlement on Ashran." Children with the same malachite skin as their parents played near the water's edge, their laughter a stark contrast to the harshness of the desert beyond. Elders sat in the shade, their amber eyes following Darren's progress through the settlement. "They've been waiting for you," Sarah explained. "Word travels fast among the Sha'ir." "I'm not comfortable with this," Darren muttered. "These people are pinning their hopes on a fantasy." "Then why did you come?" The question caught him off guard. Why had he followed Syra all this way? He could have struck out on his own, sought passage off-world from one of the trading posts. Instead, he'd walked willingly into the heart of a resistance that viewed him as some sort of savior. Before he could formulate an answer, they were approached by an elderly Sha'ir woman, her green skin faded with age to a soft jade, her white hair elaborately braided. "Veshatir Naruk," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "The prophecy speaks true. You have returned." To Darren's shock, he understood her words. Not completely, but enough to grasp their meaning. How was that possible? He'd never encountered the Sha'ir language before finding the sword. The elder must have seen his confusion. She smiled, revealing teeth that came to slight points. "Kreshvanar in your blood remembers, even if your mind does not." "It's a matter of blood memory," Sarah translated, though Darren had grasped the essence of the woman's words. The Sha'ir believes certain knowledge is carried in the bloodline, passing from parent to child. The elder gestured for them to follow her. She led them through the settlement to a cave entrance, partially hidden by hanging vines. Inside, the walls were covered with intricate carvings, illuminated by glowing crystals set into niches. "Our history," the elder explained, running her fingers over the symbols, "and yours." Darren examined the carvings, fascination overcoming his skepticism. They depicted a civilization far more advanced than the current state of Ashran. Cities of crystal towers, fields of crops, people of various species living in apparent harmony. "This was Ashran before the Great Drought," the elder continued, "when your ancestors ruled with wisdom and compassion." Further along the wall, the carvings changed, showing conflict, armies clashing, and a lone figure rising above the others, wielding what was unmistakably the sword Darren now carried. "The first uprising," Sarah murmured, "when the common people rebelled against a corrupt ruling class. The first bearer of the blade united them and established a new dynasty." The final section of carvings depicted more recent events: a palace under attack, flames consuming buildings, and a small child being handed to a robed figure who fled toward the stars. Beside the scene was the unmistakable form of the sword, buried beneath what appeared to be sand. "Terran's last act," the elder said solemnly, "to hide his son in the blade, entrusting both to fate until the time was right for their return." Darren stood before the carving, an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. The child's face was blank, stylized. It could be anyone, including him. But the doubt that had been his companion since finding the sword began to waver. "I need some air," he said abruptly, turning away from the carvings and striding out of the cave. He found himself at the edge of the lake, staring at his reflection in the still water. The face that looked back at him was weathered by years of hard living, a scar above his right eyebrow from a bar fight on Centauri Prime, lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting in the glare of a dozen different suns. Was this the face of an heir to a planetary dynasty? It seemed absurd. "They're expecting me to lead them against Sander," he said without turning, as Syra approached behind him. "To fulfill some prophecy I didn't even know existed until 3 days ago." "They are," she agreed, coming to stand beside him. "But what do you want, Darren Kell?" The question lingered between them, both simple and impossibly complex. What did he want? For most of his adult life, the answer had been straightforward. Survival, the next job, the next paycheck. But now, he paused, surprised by the words forming in his mind. "I want somewhere to belong. Somewhere worth fighting for." Sarah's hand found his, her fingers warm and calloused from years of wielding weapons. "Then perhaps you're in the right place after all." That night, the Sha'ir held a feast in Darren's honor, despite his protests. Under the stars, they shared food and drink, music flowing from strange instruments with hollow bodies and taut strings. The Sha'ir language surrounded him, and to his continued surprise, he found himself understanding more and more of it as the evening progressed. An elder approached him, bearing a small wooden box. "Tirvai Nasek," she said, offering it to him, a gift for the returned one. Inside the box was a pendant, a small crystal suspended on a leather cord. The crystal seemed to glow from within, pulsing gently with an inner light. "Heartstone," Sarah explained, sitting beside him. "They're rare now, found only in the deepest caves. It's said they respond to the bloodline of the old rulers." Darren lifted the pendant, studying the way the light within it shifted and changed. As he held it, the glow intensified slightly, casting a soft radiance onto his face. "Coincidence again?" Syra asked, a hint of a smile playing at her lips. Before Darren could respond, a commotion arose at the edge of the gathering. A Sha'ir warrior burst into the circle, his expression urgent. "Kridath! Kridath!" he shouted. "Scouts! Approaching from the eastern pass!" The festive atmosphere vanished instantly. Warriors grabbed their weapons, while children were ushered toward the caves. "Sander's men have found us," Sarah said, rising swiftly. "We need to prepare for battle." Darren stood as well, hand going to the hilt of the rusted sword. "How many?" The scout's reply was grim. "Vakar Nethsha, an army." "Impossible," Sarah breathed. "He's never committed so many forces to hunting the Sha'ir before." "It's not the Sha'ir he's hunting," Darren realized. "It's me, or rather who he thinks I am." The next hours were a whirlwind of preparation. The Sha'ir, though peaceful in their hidden valley, were no strangers to combat. Warriors checked their weapons, while others prepared defensive positions around the settlement. Syra moved among them, offering guidance and encouragement. Darren found himself naturally falling into a leadership role, his years of mercenary experience proving valuable as he helped organize their defenses. The Sha'ir followed his instructions without question, their faith in him both touching and terrifying. "We can't win a direct confrontation," he told Syra as they surveyed the settlement's defenses. "Not against a full army. We need another strategy." She nodded, her expression grim. "The caves extend deep into the mountains. We could evacuate the children and elders, lead Xander's forces into the narrow passages where their numbers won't matter as much." "That buys time, not victory," Darren said, his mind racing. An idea began to form. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, but with a chance of success. "What if we take the fight to Xander himself?" Syra looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "His army is here, which means he's likely with them. He wouldn't trust anyone else to capture or kill the heir." Darren's hand tightened on the hilt of the sword. "If we can reach him, end him, his forces might scatter." "It's risky," Syra said, but he could see the consideration in her eyes. "But if it works, Ashran has a chance at freedom." Darren met her gaze steadily. "Isn't that worth the risk?" The attack came at dawn as the first sun crested the eastern mountains. Xander's forces advanced through the narrow pass leading to the valley, their black armor a stark contrast to the reddish rock around them. At their head rode a massive figure on a mechanical mount. Xander himself, his armor more elaborate than his soldiers, his helm crowned with spikes that caught the early sunlight. The Sha'ir were ready. As the army entered the valley, they were met with a hail of spears and arrows from defenders positioned on the cliffs above. The first line of soldiers fell, but others pressed forward, their own crossbows returning fire. The battle quickly devolved into chaos. The clash of weapons, shouts of pain and defiance, the acrid smell of smoke as parts of the settlement caught fire. Darren found himself in the thick of combat, the rusty sword moving with uncanny precision in his hands. Each swing connected, each parry deflected an enemy blade, as if the weapon itself guided his movements. Across the battlefield, he caught glimpses of Syra, her curved knife flashing as she moved with deadly grace among Saunder's soldiers. Despite their valor, however, the Sha'ir were gradually being pushed back toward the cliffs, the superior numbers of the enemy beginning to tell. "Now," Darren shouted to Syra as she dispatched another opponent. "If we're going for Saunder, it has to be now." She nodded and they began fighting their way toward the tyrant, who commanded from atop his mount at the rear of his forces. A small group of Sha'ir warriors joined them, forming a wedge that cut through the enemy ranks. Saunder saw them coming. He dismounted, drawing a massive two-handed sword that gleamed with a bluish light. Unlike the ceremonial rulers of some worlds, the tyrant of Ashran was a warrior, scarred, powerful, and deadly. "So," he called as Darren approached, "the ghost of Terran returns to haunt me. Or is it his brat, all grown up?" His voice was deep, resonant, filled with malicious amusement. "Either way, your head will look fine mounted above my throne." "I've heard enough tyrants boast before killing them," Darren replied, the rusty sword held ready before him. "You all sound the same in the end." Saunder laughed, a sound like stone grinding against stone. "A boy with a rusty piece of iron dares challenge me? I'll educate you in the realities of power." He attacked with surprising speed for his size, his massive blade whistling through the air. Darren barely managed to parry, the impact reverberating up his arm. The force drove him back several steps, his boots sliding in the sand. "First lesson," Xander growled, pressing his advantage with another powerful swing. "Power isn't about who's right, it's about who's left standing." Darren ducked under the blade, feeling it pass inches above his head. He countered with a thrust that Xander deflected almost casually, then had to roll aside as the tyrant's blade came crashing down where he had stood. Around them, the battle continued, but a space had cleared as soldiers from both sides paused to watch the duel that might determine Ashran's future. Syra stood ready nearby, her knife bloody, her eyes never leaving the combat. Saunder was skilled and powerful, but Darren had spent his life fighting for survival across a dozen worlds. He read the patterns in the tyrant's attacks, noted the slight favoring of his right leg, the fractional delay after a downward strike. "Second lesson," Saunder said, battering at Darren's defenses with a series of heavy blows. "Mercy is for the weak. I showed none to your father, and I'll show none to you." The words sparked something in Darren, a flash of memory, or perhaps imagination. A palace burning, a woman's scream, strong hands passing him to another. The momentary distraction nearly cost him his life. Saunder's blade slipped past his guard, opening a gash across his ribs. Pain flared, hot and immediate, but Darren forced it aside, years of combat experience taking over. "Final lesson," Saunder said, raising his sword for what he clearly intended to be the killing blow. "No one escapes their fate." "On that," Darren replied, "we agree." As Saunder's blade descended, Darren didn't try to parry the powerful strike directly. Instead, he stepped inside the tyrant's guard, accepting a glancing blow to his shoulder in exchange for positioning. The rusty sword, guided by instinct he couldn't explain, found the gap in Saunder's armor beneath his arm. The tyrant's eyes widened in shock and pain. His massive sword fell from suddenly nerveless fingers, thudding into the sand. He stared at Darren, disbelief written across his scarred features. "Impossible," he gasped, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. "You're just a mercenary. A nobody." "Maybe," Darren said, withdrawing the blade with a swift motion. Or maybe I'm exactly who they think I am. Xander collapsed to his knees, then toppled forward onto the sand. A hushed silence fell over the battlefield, broken only by the sound of the wind and the distant calls of desert birds. Then, from the ranks of the Sha'ir, a cry went up, a name repeated over and over until it became a chant that echoed from the cliff walls. Darren-Kar, Darren-Kar, Darren-Kar. What are they saying? Darren asked Syra, who had come to stand beside him. Darren-Kar, she translated. It means Darren the Returner in their tongue. They've given you a title worthy of the prophecy. Xander's soldiers, seeing their leader fallen, began to retreat. Some threw down their weapons in surrender, while others fled back through the pass. The battle was won, though at great cost. Many Sha'ir lay wounded or dead across the valley floor. As the suns reached their zenith, casting harsh light over the aftermath of combat, Darren stood at the edge of the lake where he had reflected on his identity just days before. The sword in his hand seemed lighter now, the rust that covered it beginning to flake away in places, revealing gleaming metal beneath. What happens now? He asked as Sarah joined him. That depends on you, she replied. Xander is dead, but his supporters remain. The merchant clans, the garrison commanders in the cities, they won't surrender power easily. And they expect me to lead the fight against them? Darren gestured toward the Sha'ir, who were tending to their wounded and honoring their dead. Because of a prophecy and a rusty sword? No, Sarah said, her dark eyes meeting his. They expect you to lead because you already have. You planned the strategy that defeated Xander. You risked your life for people you barely knew. That means more than any prophecy. Darren looked out over the valley, taking in the damage from the battle. The burned dwellings, the torn earth, the makeshift medical area where the wounded were being treated. But he also saw the children emerging from the caves, the reunions between warriors and their families, the quiet determination on the faces of the survivors. I'm not Terran, he said finally. I can't be what he was, or what these people remember him to be. No one's asking you to be, Sarah replied. They're asking you to be Darren Kell, the man who found the Blade of Ancestors when no one else could, who stood against a tyrant and won. That's enough. Darren felt a weight lifting from him, not the burden of leadership which remained, but the weight of doubt that had plagued him since finding the sword. Whether he was truly Terran's son or not no longer seemed the most important question. What mattered was what he chose to do with the position fate had thrust upon him. All right, he said, turning to face her fully. Then let's rebuild. Not just the settlement, but Ashran itself. Let's make it the jewel you described, not just for the Sha'ir, but for everyone. Syra's smile was like the dawn breaking after a long night. I was hoping you'd say that. In the months that followed, Darren did not take up residence in a palace or claim a throne. Instead, he remained among the Sha'ir, helping to rebuild their settlement while sending emissaries to other communities across Ashran. Some accepted the news of Xander's defeat with joy, while others remained skeptical, but gradually alliances formed. The rust continued to flake from the Blade of Ancestors, revealing a weapon of extraordinary craftsmanship beneath. As it transformed, so did Darren, not into a different person, but into a more complete version of himself. The mercenaries' instincts remained, but now they served a different purpose. Sarah became his closest advisor, her knowledge of Ashran's politics and people invaluable. But she was more than that, a companion, a confidant. And eventually, as their mutual respect deepened into something more profound, a beloved partner in the work of restoration. Together, they established a council representing all of Ashran's peoples, not just the Sha'ir, but the city dwellers, the desert nomads, even former supporters of Xander, who were willing to embrace change. The council's first act was to redirect resources from military expansion to environmental restoration, beginning the long process of healing the planet's wounds. Water management systems were repaired, sustainable agriculture reintroduced in areas where the soil could support it. The first trees planted in the capital city's central square were a symbol of the new Ashran, one built not on exploitation and fear, but on cooperation and hope. There were setbacks, of course. Some of Xander's former commanders attempted a coup that was narrowly thwarted. Resource disputes between communities sometimes threatened the fragile peace. But with each challenge met and overcome, the new society grew stronger. Darren never learned with absolute certainty whether he was truly Terran's son, though evidence continued to accumulate. His affinity for the Shire language, the way the Heartstone glowed in his presence, memories that surfaced in dreams of a palace, and parents whose faces he couldn't quite see. In the end, he decided it didn't matter. His claim to leadership rested not on bloodline, but on the trust of the people he served. The rusty sword, lifted from the ashes of the past, became not a symbol of power but of resilience, a reminder that even buried things could be reclaimed, that what seemed lost could be found again. And Darren Kell's journey from lone wanderer to leader became a tale whispered around campfires throughout Ashran, a promise that even in the harshest desert, new hope could take root and flourish.